Hello everyone, Quentin here with Eagle 3D Streaming. We have a great video for you today. In this video, I will show you how to pixel stream Unreal Engine 5.3 on Coreweave. In this series, you will learn how to select your Coreweave instance, region, and acquire quota for pixel streaming, how to set up your instance for pixel streaming, how to pixel stream locally using Coreweave, and how to pixel stream over the internet using Coreweave. Let's jump right into it. The first thing that we need to do is to select our Coreweave instance, region, and acquire quota for pixel streaming. The way Coreweave works, similar to other clouds, is you must first make sure you have the necessary quota in order to deploy a specific instance. Instance just refers to the virtual machine that you will be deploying. The first thing you'll want to do is to make sure that you have the necessary quota. To do that, over in the bottom left, there's an upgrade quotas, and when selected, then you will have the option to submit a request increase. Now, in order to deploy a GPU machine, you must first have a quota for that GPU, and you will need a GPU because we are pixel streaming, and the GPU is what is used to actually run your application. You will also need to make sure that you have a virtual server available because the virtual server is the shell or what is used to actually interact with the GPU in order to pixel stream your application. And of course, you'll also need to make sure that you have storage as well. When you click on the upgrade quotas, double check to ensure that you have available quota. You'll need at least one GPU and one virtual server in order to pixel stream. If you do not have the necessary quota, then select the numbers that you would require. So it's as simple as just adding in number of virtual servers and the number of GPUs if you would like an increase, and then click send request, and the request will be sent, and then Coreweave will follow up if they approve it. But again, if you're only pixel streaming on one instance, you'll only need one virtual server and one GPU. The next thing, after you have confirmed that you have the necessary quota for an application, is to go ahead and deploy your virtual server. From the home page of Coreweave, under the Deploy Virtual Server, click on Deploy Now, and then select Deploy in Apps. This will take me to another screen where I can then begin to configure my GPU. My first option is to select my region, and you have the ability to pick between Chicago, Vegas, and New York. I'm going to go ahead and click Chicago, but you could, once you have your configuration determined, it's also important to note the price of your configuration. You can click this down arrow, which will expand the chevron so that you can see the breakdown and how Coreweave approaches pricing. First, of course, is the GPU, which will depend on which GPU is selected. Second is the CPU, which depends on the number of cores you have, but also it depends on which CPU core you have selected. Lastly is the storage, which will depend on the total number of storage that you have selected. And lastly, or not lastly, but also the type of operating system that you've selected will also have an impact on overall pricing. Keep all of these metrics in mind when you are selecting your instance so that you understand the pricing and how Coreweave calculates pricing for their instances for pixel streaming. Do Las Vegas or New York, and then I am going to select my instance. Now, if you're wondering, well, which instance is best for me, I will give you the comparables of these GPUs, which are more commercial cloud grade instead of, consumer grade like an RTX 3070. So I'll give you roughly the comparables so that you can make the best decision. The RTX 5000 is roughly like a NVIDIA 2080. The A4000 is closer to the RTX 3080. as well as the RTX 5000. Both of these are fairly similar to the 3080. And then if you go down to the A6000, then this is more similar to a 4080, 4090. So you have, sort of four good choices here. The RTX 5000, 2080, 3080, 4080. And you can, of course, pick whichever you think works best for you. I'm going to go ahead and pick the RTX 5000 as my GPU. And then you also have the option to select a CPU. Generally, I select this AMD CPU, but you could pick whichever CPU you prefer. The next thing is we need to specify the GPU count. Usually this is 1, and in this example it will be 1 because we'll be using one GPU to stream one application. And then we can pick the cores. Usually I like to start with 8 cores when it comes to pixel streaming just because it can consume CPU, but of course your application will be different. You can scale it down to 4 cores is also a pretty good value, or even up to 12 or 16. So I'll go ahead and select 8 cores, and I'll bump my memory up to 32. This is probably closer on the safe side. We see most applications running on between 16 and 32 gigs of RAM. So this is, a fairly standard value. If your application tends to consume more RAM, then you can always bump it up to 64, 128, whatever makes sense for you. Next, we need to select the operating system, and I'm going to go ahead and select Windows 11 so that we have this. And then we will pick the root disk size. I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to 95 just so I have a little bit of space for the operating system and your application. If the root disk size turns out to be too small for your app, then you can simply always bump it up. But, operating system is what, 50 gigs ish, roughly 50, 55. So just make sure that you leave enough space for your application. There are also some options over here for add-ons. In terms of RDP, in terms of remoting into your desktop, I'm going to use RDP, but you also can use Teradici or Parsec as well. And Coreweave does have some good documentation on how to use those. But for this example, I'll just use RDP. And then the last thing is you'll want to make sure that you attach a public IP address to your virtual server because this is the way that we will be able to connect to that virtual server over the internet through that public IP address. So make sure that's enabled. And then I'm going to create an account for my virtual server. And this is very important because since we're RDPing into the machine, these are the credentials that I'm going to use in order to RDP into the machine. So I'll just enter my name and then I'll go ahead and add the password. Obviously, make sure that you keep this information in a safe place because without this information, you will not be able to connect to the application. Once you're happy with your settings, go ahead and click deploy. And, oh, I forgot to name my, and then I'm going to add do not delete just to make sure no one from my team accidentally deletes my machine. But also, obviously make sure that you name your virtual server. So I named it my pixel streaming machine. All right, now let's click deploy. And we see that the application is now being deployed. Okay, after it has deployed, in this instance, I did receive an error that my PSX machine, do not delete, already exists. And if you do receive this error, just double check, go back to your main page. So you'll be at your home page and go to virtual servers. If you actually see this, that your virtual server has been created, then it will appear here, and sometimes you'll receive this message when it actually has been created. So when in doubt, go back to the home screen, or after you create your server, either way, go back to the home screen, click on virtual servers, and then you will see whether or not your instance has been created. And you'll be able to tell because you'll have this orange dot right here and you'll see that it's being spun up. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video now while this instance finishes setting up, and then I'll resume so that we can go into the next phase, which is setting your instance up for pixel streaming and then pixel streaming locally and then over the internet. And as a side note, this is a screen that typically you'll see once the instance is created. Please note that it does take several minutes to start, so please keep that in mind. And then once your instance is finished setting up, then you'll see it appear right here. Now that I have my instance set up, I'm going to remote into it and set it up for pixel streaming. Remoting into it is fairly easy. I use RDP, and the way to do that is first click the Windows button on your desktop and type in RDP and select Remote Desktop Application. The next thing to do is to copy the IP address of your machine, and you'll know it's operational and running because you'll see this green dot right here. If it is not running, then if, for example, you see this dot, which is more of a gray, click the drop down and then click Start. That will start the machine, and then eventually it will become green, and that's when you know it's ready to use. Go to the RDP and copy the IP address and paste it in here and click Connect. It will ask for your security credentials. Now, if you remember, when we were setting up our PC, or excuse me, our virtual server, you were to enter in your username and your password. And that's the reason why we need it, is because these credentials right here are the credentials that we'll enter into here. So I'll go ahead and enter my my username, and then I will enter in the password. And click OK. And that will start my RDP session. Now, setting up for pixel streaming on Coreweave is fairly straightforward. The first thing that you need to do is you need to go to Device Manager, and I always like to just confirm that I have my driver set up. So I click on Display Adapters, and then I confirm that I have the driver set up, which is great. The other thing that I need to make sure that I have is, of course, the application. So the way that I get there is I go ahead and start the browser. After I get through all those questions, and I paste in the Google Drive URL to my application. Now, of course, there's multiple different ways that you can transfer your Unreal Engine application to the Coreweave desktop. In this example, I'm just using Google Drive, and then I create a share link, and then I just paste that share link into the browser and I download my Unreal Engine application, which you can see over here. Once it's finished, the last step that I do is I just extract this onto the machine. And once it's finished, let's take a quick look inside. You'll see that when I open up my project, which is the built files, you'll see that what I have is all the files that you receive when you build your project for Windows with the Pixel Streaming plugin enabled. And once you've confirmed that you have all of those files here, then you're ready to go on to the next step, which is pixel streaming your Unreal Engine application locally on Coreweave. Now that I have my Coreweave instance set up and ready for pixel streaming, it's now time to pixel stream locally on Coreweave. And if you're wondering, well, why do we pixel stream locally versus over the internet? The reason is that there are many different ways to get hung up setting up to pixel stream your application. And in order to take things step by step and making the debugging process easier, we first stream locally to make sure that we have all the fundamental pieces set up properly, and then once we've confirmed that, then we go for pixel streaming over the internet. This video then focuses specifically on pixel streaming locally. In order to get started, first confirm two key things. The first is that you have your Unreal Engine build on your Coreweave virtual machine, and that you have pixel streaming plugin enabled, and that it's built for Windows. That's the first thing to confirm. The other is to go to Device Manager by just clicking the Windows icon, selecting Device Manager, and then going down to Display Adapters and confirming that you have the NVIDIA driver installed. Now Coreweave does install this automatically for you, so this should be here, but it's always nice to just double check. The next thing that we need to do is we need to set up this PC for pixel streaming, which means that we need to set up the signaling server. In order to do that, let's go into My Project and then go into Samples, Pixel Streaming, Web Servers, Get PS Servers, in Web Servers, and double click on it. If you see this screen, just click More Info and then click Run Anyway. And once the installation is finished, you'll see many additional files and folders in the Web Servers folder. The next thing that we need to do is we need to set up the signaling server. From the Web Servers folder, double click on Signaling Web Server, then double click on Platform Scripts, then CMD, and then double click on Setup. And we wait for the signaling server setup to complete. Once the signaling server setup is complete, the next thing we do to run the signaling server is double click on Run Local. If you receive this message, just double check both of these boxes and click Allow Access. Okay, now we have the signaling server running, which is the mechanism that will stream your Unreal Engine application into a browser. The next thing we need to run, obviously, is our Unreal Engine application. Now I'll go back to my build and you'll see I have my typical Unreal Engine executable. Now if I double click this, then select Run Anyways, the first thing I'll notice is generally when you run your Unreal Engine exe for the first time on your VM, you're going to see this message. Just say yes. And go through this installation process. Once the setup is successful, you actually need to double click on the app again to start. So I just double clicked again and now we're waiting for it to start. And you see that I have a black screen, and if you receive this, check both boxes, then click Allow Access. And we have our application running on the virtual machine. The good news, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that we're successfully running our Unreal Engine application on your virtual machine, which means the drivers are set up and the virtual machine can actually run a UE app. So great start, but the challenge is that now it's taking over the entire screen. So how am I going to work in the VM when I can't see anything? And two, we also have to add some pixel streaming commands when the executable file starts so that pixel streaming will successfully work. So in order to do that, I'll go ahead and exit the application by pressing the Windows key, then going to Task Manager, going to Processes, and closing the application. Okay, so now the application is closed and we need to add a few commands to the initialization of the CXE so the game doesn't take over my entire screen and so it can communicate with our signaling server. To do that, right click on the EXE show more options, and then go to create shortcut. Once your shortcut is created, right click on that, show more, and then go to properties. And now there are a few properties that we need to add in order to pixel stream and for the game not to display on our screen. So those three commands are pixel streaming IP equals localhost, pixel streaming port equals 8888, and render off screen, which obviously this is the command for the game to render in the background rather than on the screen. We take these commands and we go back to our properties of our shortcut and we paste them at the end of this target. Go to the end of your target and make sure that there is a space, and then we start pasting these in. And I'll of course provide these exact commands in the YouTube description so that you have easy access. But let's go ahead and paste all these in and make sure that there's always a space in between each of these flags, like so. And then once you have all three of these in, click apply and then click OK. And I'll go ahead and close this. All right, so now we have these properties successfully saved to our shortcut, and you can always just right click and go to properties to confirm they're there. And now that they're there, let's go ahead and double click on the shortcut to run it. Now something interesting happened. It registered a new streamer, and that is because we've now added the commands necessary for the app to connect to the signaling server. So that's good news. But we see that the application isn't taking over our entire screen. If we go to the task manager, we can, however, see, if we go to processes, we can, however, see that the app is now running in the background rather than rendering on the screen. That's good news because now the app is still running, but we can still work inside the VM. The next thing we need to do in order to pixel stream locally is just open up a browser Chrome, or excuse me, a browser. You can use Chrome, or in this case I'm using Edge, and just type in localhost. Once you do that and you click connect, then the pixel stream will start, which is great. Now, if you did not successfully get here, there could be two possible sources for that. The first is, and I'm going to close my signaling server, and you may see this screen that says auto connecting now or nothing. If you see something similar to this, that probably means that your signaling server is not running. In order to start your signaling server, simply go to My Project, Samples, Pixel Streaming, Web Servers, Signaling Web Server, Platform Scripts, CMD, and then double click on Run Local, which will start your signaling server. We'll see that it's connected, and we click refresh, and we have our stream back. The other thing that can happen is if my game is not running. So I'm going to go ahead and close my game, and let's see what happens. Oh, not that one. Just a second. Go ahead and filter. There it is. So I go to my game, and then I click End Task, and it's trying, the signaling server is trying to auto connect, but there's nothing to stream. And if I click to restart, then nothing happens. So all I need to do is go back to my shortcut, double click on it, wait for the application to begin running, and the game will automatically, or excuse me, the signaling server will automatically begin streaming your game into the browser. In this video, we went through the setting up the foundation for pixel streaming by pixel streaming locally on Coreweave. It's important to first pixel stream locally always, just to make sure that you have all the foundational pieces set up, which means you have your driver set up, you have your signaling server, your application running, and you're able to successfully pixel stream locally. And then once all of that is confirmed, you're ready for the next step, which is then to pixel stream over the internet. Now that I am successfully pixel streaming locally, the next step is to pixel stream over the internet. And it's always important to pixel stream locally first, just to make sure you have everything properly set up. And assuming you are able to pixel stream through the local host, the next step is to stream over the internet. And the way that works is we pixel stream through the IP address of the virtual machine. And if you recall, back when we were setting up our instance on Coreweave, we set it up so that we did attach a public IP address to the server and it was enabled. This is very important to do when you're setting up your virtual machine, because this is how we make sure we're able to pixel stream through the internet. So if you had that enabled, then your virtual machine will have a public IP address. And there's a few ways to get that IP address. The first is, if you look at the top of your RDP, you will see the public IP address. But if you're using Parsec or Teradici or something else, then you can also just go into a browser and say, what is my IP? And you'll get the public IP address of the virtual machine. Once you have the public IP address, we actually just use this to connect to the stream. So it's literally the address of where the streamer is located. So in order to pixel stream over the internet, all I have to do is, and I'll close that, all I have to do is enter in that IP address, and I am successfully pixel streaming. Now, there's a few important things to note. The first is that I did have my signaling server and my Unreal Engine application running. So I'm going to go ahead and close my app and my signaling server so that my connection goes away. I'm actually going to, yeah, there we go. Okay, so I've closed my signaling server and my Unreal Engine application. If you see a page like this, that probably means that your signaling server is not running or your app is not running. And it's important that you make sure that you have both running in order to successfully pixel stream. In order to do that, let's first start the signaling server. I do that by going to my project and then samples, pixel streaming, web servers, signaling web server, platform scripts, CMD, and I will go ahead and double click on run local. That is going to start my signaling server. Now that I have my signaling server started, the next thing I'm going to do is double click on my shortcut that I created to start my Unreal Engine application. Since I have it running in the background, I will receive a message here that it is connected, but I also just always like to double check and make sure that my app is also in the task manager. Once I have both my Unreal Engine application and the signaling server running, let's now type in the public, and I'll close that so we do a fresh tab or a fresh browser. Let's type in the public IP address. And we see that it's connected. Now, the astute people who are watching this noticed, well, yes, I am pixel streaming through the IP address, but you're still in the virtual machine, so you're not technically going through the internet. And that's true. The reason why I always do this first on the virtual machine is just to make sure that the IP address can be reached. Sometimes there's issues with ports. It's specifically ports that can throw a wrench into things, and so I always make sure that the IP address is good first by entering it into the IP address, by entering in the IP address onto a browser tab in the virtual machine to make sure that there's no issues there. Now that I have everything set up, I am now ready to pixel stream over the internet. And the way I'm going to demonstrate that is I'm going to make my RDP a window, and then on the right side is a browser tab from my computer that I am currently located. So over here, I'm working from a desktop that's in Dallas, Texas. And over here on the left is the Coreweave instance that I have running in Chicago. So now when I type in the IP address of this Coreweave instance from my desktop here in Chicago, I should be able to connect to it. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. So all I do, if you want to pixel stream over the internet, is enter in the IP address. And there we are. So now I have the, now I'm properly streaming over the internet onto to my PC here in Dallas. Now, if just in terms of troubleshooting, the first things to always check, obviously are make sure your signaling server is running, and you'll know it's running because you'll see this. Make sure your Unreal Engine application is running, and you'll know that because you'll see this information. And assuming you have both of those running, sometimes you can get stuck on this click to start. After you do this, you see some message that says, oh, I think it's WebRTC negotiating or something like that. If you get stuck on that page and you're not able to connect, there is one additional step you can do, which is to activate a turn server, which will act as a middleman between your Coreweave instance and the end destination. So if you are not able to connect and you receive a message that says something like I believe it's like WebRTC negotiation or something, you'll see negotiation, something like that, then what you can do is go ahead and shut down your signaling server, and you'll also notice that that causes an issue over here, which makes sense because now there's no way for my browser to communicate with the Coreweave instance. And let's go ahead and now run the signaling server with a turn server. I go back to my project and I go to Samples, Pixel Streaming, Web Servers, Signaling Web Server, Platform Scripts, CMD, and now instead of run local, I'm going to start with turn signaling server. Now if I just double click on this, it's just going to open up this script in Notepad and not run it, so that's not what we want. Instead, right click on it and run with PowerShell. I did that kind of quick, but right click on it and then there's a run with PowerShell command, and then you'll see PowerShell opening up, and now we will see both the signaling server and the turn server being set up. Check both boxes, click Allow Access, and now that we have both the signaling server and the turn server running, you can go ahead and try it again. So again, it worked for me. I didn't have the issue. Sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. But in case you run into that issue, this is a way that you can solve it. In this video, I showed you how to pixel stream over the internet using a Coreweave instance. We went through step by step the process of setting up your application, your signaling server, and then pixel streaming using the public IP address of the virtual machine. And then we also looked at some of the ways to troubleshoot setting up pixel streaming, like enabling a turn server. Now, if you feel like doing none of this, and I don't blame you, then there is another option. You can create an account with Eagle 3D Streaming. It's free for 7 days, and you can easily upload your application and begin streaming it immediately at a much cheaper price, and you don't have to worry about babysitting your machines and turning them on and turning them off and watching them. It's super easy. You have all of your links, everything managed here. You can easily go to your project and click play, and your application will simply play It's super easy to use, and set up your free trial today. I'm Quentin Anderson with Eagle 3D Streaming. This has been our developer series, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video. Bye for now.
Upload your first Unreal Engine project on our Pixel streaming platform for free. To create an account, go to account.eagle3dstreaming.com/sign up and get a free 7 days trial. Eagle 3D Streaming, it's just easier.